Let me tell you something right now. What just happened in Indianapolis was not a basketball game. It was not a sporting contest. It was not a friendly competition between two professional teams trying to settle a score on hardwood. What we just witnessed was a full-scale, no-holds-barred, organized act of desperation from a Phoenix Mercury squad that came into Gainbridge Fieldhouse with one singular mission, and that mission had nothing to do with winning a basketball game. Their mission was to physically, psychologically, and emotionally break Caitlin Clark before she could do what she has been doing to every single team in this league all season long. And I need you to understand something before we go any further. They failed spectacularly, embarrassingly, historically. The Indiana Fever walked out of that building with an 86-77 victory, improving their record to an absolutely impressive 10-17 on the season. But the final score doesn't even begin to tell the real story of what went down inside that arena tonight. Because this game featured 6 technical fouls, 1 ejection, a player with a bloody lip requiring courtside medical attention, another player gutting out the entire contest with a swollen black eye, phantom foul calls that defied every law of physics and logic, and some of the most brazenly one-sided officiating you will ever see in your entire life watching professional basketball at any level. And through all of it, every dirty play, every cheap shot, every crooked whistle, every veteran trying to get in her head, number 22 stood completely unbothered, completely locked in, and completely unstoppable. But before we get into the glory, we need to talk about how horrifying the first 15 minutes of this game actually were, because the Fever almost handed Phoenix exactly what they came for before the real show even had a chance to begin. 2 for 18. Read that again. 2 for 18 from the field. 6 points in the first 15 minutes of action. According to The Athletic's live game commentary, that number is tied for the fewest points the Indiana Fever franchise has scored in any opening quarter over the last 10 years. And when you're watching this game in real time, possession after possession dissolving into bricks and turnovers, you start to genuinely wonder if this Indiana team showed up to the wrong building tonight. The offense looked like it was running through wet cement. Nobody could get a clean look, nobody could shake their defender, nobody could generate any kind of rhythm whatsoever. And right in the middle of this historic offensive collapse, head coach Stephanie White made a decision that had every single Fever fan in that building looking at each other with pure confusion on their faces. She pulled Caitlin Clark off the floor during an offensive drought against the most physical, most aggressive defense in the entire league. Think about that for a second. Your team is completely stagnant, your offense has completely shut down, you have a generational playmaker on your roster who is the only person capable of drawing double teams, collapsing a defense with a single crossover, and generating gravity for every single player around her, and your solution is to send her to the bench and leave Kelsey Mitchell out there to figure it out completely isolated against a defense that had spent the entire week game planning specifically to suffocate this Fever offense? It was a baffling call. There is simply no other way to describe it. Now, to be completely fair, Kelsey Mitchell is an absolute gamer, and she responded the only way she knows how, by putting her head down and making impossible buckets in impossible situations. Her tough isolation scores in those dying minutes of the first quarter were the only reason the deficit didn't spiral completely out of control before the primary unit could regroup. The woman is built differently when it comes to clutch situations, and her ability to create her own shot off the bounce against any defender in this league is something genuinely special. And the one other bright spot in an otherwise painful quarter to sit through, Lexie Hull, who absolutely refused to let the team die quietly, stepping into a corner 3 with ice water in her veins and drilling it clean as the crowd desperately needed something to hold on to. Hull is the ultimate glue player for this roster. She hits the shots nobody else wants to take, she sacrifices her body on every defensive possession, and she plays with a competitive urgency that elevates the entire team around her. That corner 3 felt like a lifeline being thrown to a drowning team, and she delivered it with zero hesitation. But make no mistake, the reason the Fever's offense was completely frozen in that first quarter wasn't just cold shooting. There was something far more sinister happening on the floor that the broadcast cameras were only partially capturing. On the very second play of the game, Alyssa Thomas announced exactly what kind of night this was going to be. Aaliyah Boston came into this contest already dealing with a highly visible, clearly painful black eye from a previous matchup. The injury was obvious, it was documented, everyone in that building knew about it. And what does Alyssa Thomas do on literally the second play of the basketball game? She drives directly into the paint, goes right at Boston, and deliberately extends her forearm and her elbow so that it rubs directly across Boston's swollen eye socket. Not accidental contact, not incidental bumping, a deliberate, calculated decision to attack a known injury right in front of 3 officials who had a completely unobstructed view of the entire play. The Indiana bench erupted immediately, players on their feet, coaches screaming toward the officiating crew, and the referees, they swallowed their whistles and let it go, like they had seen absolutely nothing. But that wasn't even the worst part of that same possession. As if the elbow to the eye wasn't outrageous enough, a second Phoenix defender immediately flies into the paint on that exact same play and grabs Aaliyah Boston by the wrist, actually wraps both hands around her wrist and physically drags her arm downward, trying to prevent her from catching a pass. We are talking about moves you would expect to see in a wrestling ring, not a professional basketball court. And yet the whistle stays in the referee's pocket like it was welded shut. This is the moment, though. This specific moment of blatant, unpunished, dangerous physicality, where you first started to see what this Indiana Fever team is truly made of in the year 2026. Because instead of wilting, instead of looking to the officials for protection that was clearly never coming, they responded with pure basketball violence of their own. Caitlin Clark exploded out of nowhere, reading a lazy cross-court pass before it left the passer's hands and tipping it clean away for a spectacular interception. The play triggered a chaotic sequence that culminated in Aaliyah Boston, the same player who had just been elbowed directly in her injured eye, rising up with absolutely volcanic energy to swat the ball out of the paint on back-to-back possessions. 2 consecutive thunderous blocks on the same possession, the second one launching the ball all the way into the luxury suite rows as Boston screamed at the Phoenix front line to keep that weak stuff out of her house. The entire arena felt that moment. The entire arena understood what it meant. The Fever were not running. Not tonight, not from anyone. But Alyssa Thomas simply would not stop. For the entire first half, she operated on that basketball court like it was a football field, lowering her shoulder on every single drive, running through anybody wearing Indiana blue and gold without even pretending to attempt a legal basketball move. According to Bleacher Report's mid-game breakdown, Thomas was committing what should have been textbook offensive charging fouls on virtually every single drive to the basket. The geometry was obvious, the contact was obvious, the intent was obvious, and the officiating crew gave her complete and total immunity from the rulebook, like they had been explicitly instructed to let it all slide. It was honestly one of the most troubling officiating performances you will see at any level of professional basketball. And while this organized physical bludgeoning was happening on the hardwood, the game's most important player was being forced to sit at the end of the bench watching it all unfold in real time. You could see it from across the arena. Even sitting on the bench, Caitlin Clark was radiating pure, controlled fury. She was locked in on the floor, watching every possession, tracking every defensive scheme, literally staring through Coach Stephanie White with an expression that communicated one thing and one thing only. Put me back in this game right now, because I know exactly how to solve every single problem happening out there. And when White finally answered that call and checked her back in during the second quarter, what happened next was so immediate, so decisive, and so dominant that it felt less like a basketball player re-entering a game and more like a force of nature being unleashed. Caitlin Clark checked in, walked directly to the top of the key, used a quick screen to get even the tiniest sliver of space, and released a high, arcing three-point attempt that splashed through the net so cleanly it barely moved the nylon. Beautiful rotation, perfect touch, and the message it sent to the Phoenix bench was loud and clear. The drought is over, the real game starts now, and none of your defensive scheming matters anymore. She wasn't done on that possession. She was never done, because on Indiana's very next defensive sequence, Clark read the passing lane like she had already seen the play called 3 possessions ahead, jumped the cross-court pass for a spectacular clean steal, and immediately pushed the tempo at full speed before threading an absolute needle of a pass through 2 defenders to find Maisha Hines-Allen trailing perfectly for a wide-open three-pointer. The chemistry on that play was genuinely breathtaking. 2 players operating on the exact same wavelength, moving in perfect synchronization, creating and destroying the entire Phoenix defensive scheme in about 4 seconds of basketball action. The Phoenix bench visibly deflated. Their coaches started talking hurriedly amongst themselves. Their defensive game plan was evaporating in real time, and there was nothing they could do about it. And this is where I want to say something about what Caitlin Clark is becoming in the year 2026, because it goes well beyond the highlights and the signature moments. She has developed a level of basketball intelligence that simply should not exist in a player of her age and experience. She is reading coverages before the ball is even inbounded. She is identifying defensive rotations before they even form. She is making passes to spots where teammates haven't even arrived yet because she already knows where they're going to be. This is the stuff that separates good players from great players, and great players from all-time legends. And she is doing it right now, right in front of our eyes, at 23 years old. But of course, the moment she started dissecting the Phoenix defense and swinging momentum completely in Indiana's favor, the officiating crew decided it was time to pump the brakes. On a perimeter defensive possession, Clark was moving her feet laterally, keeping her hands completely off the ball handler, giving 0 contact. Picture-perfect, textbook perimeter defense. The whistle blew anyway. A phantom foul with no explanation, no contact, and no justification. The entire building looked around in genuine collective confusion, trying to figure out what anyone in a striped shirt could have possibly seen on that play. Here is what separates the truly special players from everyone else. They don't let it get in their heads. They use it. Clark caught the ball on the very next possession, took 2 dribbles toward the logo, planted her feet, and launched a deep three-pointer from a distance that most players in this league wouldn't even attempt in a practice setting with 0 defense. It went in. Pure, nothing but net. And the look on her face after that shot went down was the look of someone who had just told the entire building exactly how she felt about their phantom foul call, without saying a single word. There is a certain type of veteran player in professional sports who operates under the belief that their years of experience automatically entitle them to a level of respect and deference from younger players. Dana Bonner is that type of veteran, and what happened immediately after Caitlin Clark's deep logo 3 was one of the most entertainingly backfiring veteran flex moments in recent sports memory. Bonner walked directly up to Clark after that three-pointer landed, pointed a finger right in her face, and started talking the kind of reckless trash that is essentially a veteran's way of saying, "You might have gotten that one, but don't you forget who the experienced player is in this conversation." It was an attempt at psychological intimidation. It was an attempt to rattle a younger player and remind her of the established hierarchy. It was a move Bonner has probably executed successfully dozens of times throughout her career. Caitlin Clark did not blink once. She walked right back up into Bonner's personal space, looked her directly in the eyes, and told her in no uncertain terms to shut up and sit down, before spinning around to face the crowd and holding up 3 fingers to signal exactly what had just gone on the scoreboard. The absolute audacity, the stone-cold confidence, the complete refusal to be intimidated by a veteran who had just decided to make her the target of some post-game theatrics. It was the kind of moment that gets replayed on highlight reels for years, and it sent shockwaves through the entire Gainbridge Fieldhouse crowd, who erupted into a wall of noise that shook the building. And this right here is what the rest of the WNBA has not figured out how to deal with yet in the year 2026. Caitlin Clark does not just beat you on the scoreboard, she gets in your head. She makes you react. She makes veterans with 10 years of professional experience forget their composure and start talking trash after a three-pointer, and then immediately regret it. The moment Bonner walked up to her with that pointing finger, the psychological battle was already over. Clark had already won it before she said a single word. The crowd energy after that exchange completely transformed the game. Maisha Hines-Allen immediately went to work feeding off the electric atmosphere, grinding through multiple defenders in the paint to finish a tough, contested layup that required the kind of physical toughness only a player with NFL linebacker DNA running through her family tree could possibly summon. The Fever were alive, they were locked in, and the momentum was officially, completely, irrevocably wearing blue and gold. But Alyssa Thomas wasn't done making life dangerous, and the referees weren't done looking the other way. There comes a point in certain basketball games where the officiating stops being a frustrating background variable and starts becoming the actual story of the game. This was that game. And the specific possession that crystallized the double standard most clearly happened when a Phoenix defender set a moving screen on Caitlin Clark that was so blatantly illegal, so cartoonishly obvious in its violation, that the standard broadcasting crew actually cited the NBA rulebook in their commentary to explain why it was a foul 7 days a week and twice on Sunday. The defender stepped directly into Clark's path, extended their torso outward, and made full-body contact that left Clark with zero time to avoid the collision. She went down, she got back up, no whistle, nothing. Play continued as if the entire sequence had happened in an alternate dimension where moving screens are perfectly acceptable fundamental basketball. And the truly maddening part is not even the individual missed call. It is the cumulative effect of an entire game being officiated this way. According to Bleacher Report's mid-game analysis, the pattern of illegal screens and physical contact targeting Indiana's roster was not random or coincidental, it was systematic and consistent. Phoenix ran the same illegal screen action on Clark 4 consecutive times on 4 consecutive possessions. 4 times, in a row, all targeting the same player, all in plain sight of the officiating crew, and all 4 times the officials decided that what they had just witnessed with their 2 eyes from 5 feet away without any obstruction was not a foul. This is the physical and psychological gauntlet Caitlin Clark has to navigate every single night. This is the reality of being the most watched, most targeted, most envied player in this league right now. And the fact that she responds to all of it by simply making basketball plays and winning games says everything you need to know about who she is as a competitor. And Indiana's response to all of it was beautiful. Aaliyah Boston, who had been struggling from the field all night, 2 made shots on the evening to that point, stepped out to the perimeter and buried a massive three-pointer that sent the Fever bench into an absolute frenzy. Boston's shot was the embodiment of what this Indiana team has become in 2026, a group of players who refuse to let the circumstances of a game, however unfair, determine their fate. They just keep playing. Then, Kelsey Mitchell tipped the ball off the inbound, used her blazing first step to blow past her defender, and finished a high-difficulty left-handed layup at the glass that froze the rim protectors completely. The Fever were not just surviving the physical assault and the corrupt officiating, they were thriving in spite of it. In the chaos of a game this physically and emotionally intense, it is easy to miss the subtle chess moves happening beneath the surface. And the single most important chess move of the entire second half was Caitlin Clark identifying a mismatch in the Phoenix interior defense and making the deliberate tactical decision to exploit it on repeat until Phoenix figured out how to stop it. And they never did. The target was Monique Billings, and the results were nothing short of spectacular. On 3 out of 4 consecutive possessions in the third quarter, Clark identified Billings cutting through the paint, timed her passes to absolute perfection, and found her for completely uncontested layups and close-range finishes that left Phoenix's defensive coordinators frantically burning timeouts trying to patch a leak that they simply had no answer for. Clark was essentially playing the role of an elite point guard, running a pick-and-roll operation, except instead of a traditional pick-and-roll, she was using the gravity of her perimeter threat to pull defenders away from the paint and then surgically delivering the ball to Billings in the exact space that opened up as a result. It was clinic-level basketball intelligence on public display. Billings, for her part, was absolutely magnificent. She finished the night a perfect 4 for 4 from the field, made every single layup she was given, including several that required finishing through contact, ran the floor with intense energy in transition, and locked down the paint on the defensive end with a physicality and ferocity that completely altered Phoenix's ability to generate anything easy inside. This was the version of Monique Billings that this Indiana roster desperately needed to show up, and she delivered it on the biggest possible stage. The defensive end was equally spectacular. Dana Bonner, still apparently rattled from her earlier confrontation with Clark, attacked the paint on a fourth-quarter possession with what she probably thought was the clean path to the basket. Billings stepped up, timed her perfectly, and swatted the ball completely out of Bonner's hands on the layup attempt. A clean, powerful, emphatic block that immediately triggered an Indiana fast break. Kelsey Mitchell caught the outlet, pushed the tempo, and finished through 2 contesting defenders with a kind of athletic, impossible angle finish that reminds you why she is one of the most dynamic scorers in this league when she is operating at full speed. Even sitting courtside, NBA superstar Tyrese Halliburton from the Indiana Pacers was caught on camera with an expression of pure, wide-eyed amazement at what this Fever team was putting together in real time. And that is saying something. This is a man who plays and watches elite professional basketball on a daily basis, and what Indiana was doing in that third quarter was clearly registering as something extraordinary, even by his extremely high standards. Clark capped off the dominant run with one of the more technically sophisticated shots of the entire evening, a hard left-driving gather step that completely froze her defender, creating just enough separation for her to kiss a high-difficulty floating jumper off the glass and in. 3-level scoring, pull-up mid-range, floating finisher, deep 3. There is no coverage in existence that neutralizes all of it simultaneously, and Phoenix was watching that reality play out possession by possession as their lead evaporated, and then turned into a deficit that started to look insurmountable. Then, Kelsey Mitchell decided to administer the finishing blow. She isolated on the perimeter, used a beautiful hesitation dribble sequence to put her defender completely on roller skates, stepped back, and launched a 3-pointer that pushed the Indiana lead to 18 points. A few possessions later, she found the exact same spot, the exact same rhythm, and buried another cold-blooded 3-ball to push it to 21. The Phoenix bench was completely demoralized. Their body language had turned from physical aggression to emotional exhaustion. The game was over. Everyone inside Gainsbridge Fieldhouse knew it. And that is precisely the moment when things got truly dangerous. There is a specific type of frustration that overtakes a team when they realize they are being completely dominated, and there is absolutely nothing they can do to stop it. It is the kind of frustration that strips away all pretense of professionalism and reduces grown adults to their most raw, reactive instincts. That is exactly what happened to the Phoenix Mercury in the closing minutes of this basketball game. And what followed was some of the most chaotic, dangerous, theatrical sports content you will see anywhere in professional athletics in 2026. The first warning sign came during a dead ball situation when a Phoenix defender got unnecessarily physical with Caitlin Clark, grabbing, pushing, making contact that had absolutely no basketball justification. Clark did not back down. She squared up, physically pushed her off, and said very clearly and very loudly for anyone within earshot to get off of her. Twice. The entire building heard it, the cameras caught it, and the controlled fury in her voice communicated something important. She was done absorbing cheap shots without responding. She was drawing a line. And then, on the very next live possession, Alyssa Thomas executed the kind of illegal push-off that has defined her entire approach to this game, using her full body weight, lowering her center of gravity, and bulldozing a defender completely out of her path. And here's what makes this specific play so maddening in context. If Caitlin Clark ever attempted a push-off even half as blatant as what Thomas gets away with on a nightly basis, she would be called for an offensive foul on every single possession, probably fouled out of games before halftime, and likely be the subject of a league discipline memo. But when Thomas does it, the officials apparently see something different than what the rest of the world sees when watching the same footage. Clark responded the only way she knew how, by walking directly down the court on the very next possession and burying a mid-range pull-up jumper with the kind of confidence and precision that made it look like the easiest shot in the world. Her confidence in this 2026 season has reached levels that feel genuinely unfair to opposing defenses. There is a calmness and a certainty in her game right now that no amount of physical intimidation or crooked officiating seems capable of penetrating. And then the confrontation happened. Dana Bonner had clearly spent this entire game carrying a personal grievance toward Clark that was building with every basket and every show of defiance. It finally boiled completely over in a face-to-face confrontation that escalated rapidly into a full team scrum, with players from both sides flooding the floor in a chaotic, emotional mess of pushing and screaming and general madness that brought the entire game to a standstill. But the person who needs to be talked about here, the person who emerged from that confrontation with their reputation completely elevated, is Maisha Hines-Allen. Because while everyone else was processing the chaos and trying to figure out what was happening, Hines-Allen stepped directly into the teeth of the confrontation without a single second of hesitation, dropped her shoulders, squared up, stood toe-to-toe with the entire Phoenix roster. She did not blink, she did not flinch, she did not back up a single inch. And look, this shouldn't surprise anyone who knows anything about her family background. Her brother, Josh Allen, is a superstar pass rusher in the NFL. Physical confrontations and high-stakes competitive situations are literally in this woman's genetic makeup. You want to bully this Indiana team? You want to run up on Caitlin Clark? You are going to have to go through Maisha Hines-Allen first. And she made absolutely certain that every Phoenix player in that building understood that reality clearly. Clark was standing directly behind her the entire time, wearing a massive smile, completely loving the energy, screaming, "Let's go!" as the arena descended into beautiful electric bedlam. This is what team chemistry looks like when it is real and authentic. A superstar knowing her teammates will protect her, teammates knowing their superstar will perform when it matters most. But in what can genuinely only be described as one of the most absurd officiating decisions of the entire season, the referees reviewed the altercation and somehow arrived at the conclusion that the person in this situation who deserved a technical foul was Caitlin Clark. Clark stood in the middle of the court with her mouth literally hanging open, eyes wide, asking the officials directly what she had done to earn a technical foul when she had been standing in place the entire time. It was a completely fair and completely reasonable question. The referee's response? He looked at her, extended his hand in a dismissive gesture, and physically waved her off like she wasn't worth the explanation. He gave her the hand. He literally told the best player in the building, the face of the league, the person who had just been the victim of a team-wide confrontation, that she was not entitled to an explanation for a penalty called against her. It was genuinely one of the most disrespectful moments you will witness in professional sports.
The technical foul tally from this game, confirmed by ESPN's post-game statistical tracking, reached 6 total, with an ejection, numbers that reflect a game that had fully crossed the boundary from competitive basketball into something that more closely resembled organized chaos. Sophie Cunningham was the next player to completely lose the plot, pacing the court in a state of barely contained rage, throwing what can genuinely be described as a full-scale professional athlete temper tantrum over the fact that Clark had completely taken up residence inside her head. The frustration built and built until Cunningham could no longer contain it, eventually sitting down on the bench with the body language of someone who had just had their entire worldview shaken. And in the cruelest poetic justice timing imaginable, the very next time Cunningham was back on the floor, she completely misread a defensive rotation, turned the ball over on an embarrassing mental lapse, and stood there staring into the middle distance with the exact expression of someone who knows they have just been completely humiliated on national television. And then the violence reached a genuinely alarming level. In a scrum near the paint, Kelsey Mitchell caught a stray elbow directly to the mouth. Not incidental contact, not a gentle bump. A hard, direct shot to the face that split her lip and required medical attention from the team trainers on the sideline. Mitchell sat on the bench for a few minutes with a towel pressed to her bleeding mouth, then immediately got back up, checked back into the game, and went right back to work like nothing had happened, because that is who Kelsey Mitchell is. Let that image sit with you for a moment. Aaliyah Boston playing all 40 minutes with a swollen, painful black eye that had been deliberately targeted from the opening possession. Kelsey Mitchell finishing the game with a bloody split lip from a shot she had no way of avoiding. This is the physical toll that playing against a team determined to win through intimidation and violence rather than basketball skill extracts from a roster. And Indiana wore both injuries as battle scars and kept winning anyway. Maisha Hines-Allen's second technical foul of the night came after Sophie Cunningham physically tried to run directly at her in the closing minutes, an act that had no basketball purpose and every intimidation purpose. Hines-Allen stood completely still, looked down at her, and didn't move a muscle, but the officials gave her the technical anyway, resulting in an automatic ejection that sent the emotional heartbeat of the team's second-half performance to the locker room before the final buzzer. It was another officiating decision that defied explanation, and further proof that the rulebook was being applied selectively throughout this entire contest. With the game winding down and the outcome no longer seriously in doubt, you might have expected the officiating situation to settle into something resembling normalcy. You would have been wrong. The final minutes of this basketball game delivered two officiating moments so genuinely extraordinary in their absurdity that they have already become the dominant conversation in basketball circles across the country. The first came on a standard Clark drive sequence, where she gathered the ball off the dribble using a completely textbook, completely legal gather step that you can watch executed in the NBA on dozens of possessions every single night without a single whistle blown. The officials called a travel. Clark put both hands on top of her head, looked directly at the official, and communicated with her entire body that she genuinely could not process what had just happened, because it was a travel call that flies in the face of fundamental basketball officiating principles and suggests either a fundamental misunderstanding of the gather step rule or a deliberate targeting of a specific player. Either explanation is deeply troubling, but nothing, absolutely nothing in this entire chaotic, insane, historic game topped what happened on the defensive possession that followed. A Phoenix player, attempting to prevent a Clark fast break opportunity, turned and delivered a direct elbow strike to Clark's torso. We are not talking about a glancing blow or an ambiguous collision, a deliberate elbow to the ribs in full view of multiple officials. The referees actually stopped the game to review the play on the monitor. They had slow-motion, multi-angle video evidence of a player elbowing another player in the midsection. The entire building waited. Connor McCaffrey, Clark's boyfriend, was caught by the television cameras in the crowd with an expression of pure horror and disgust watching the review process unfold.
The referees completed their review. They had watched the footage, they had seen the elbow, they had access to every angle, and they called the foul on Caitlin Clark, the victim of the elbow, the person who received the physical contact. They decided that she was the one who had committed a foul on the play. The absolute magnitude of that decision, reviewing footage of someone getting hit and calling the penalty on the person who was hit, is difficult to even fully articulate. It is the kind of officiating failure that becomes a case study in how not to administer a professional sporting event. Phoenix stepped to the free throw line and missed. The basketball gods, apparently having watched the same replay as the rest of us, intervened to ensure that the corruption of the moment did not produce points. And Caitlin Clark's response to the entire sequence was the defining image of her night and, frankly, of her entire 2026 season so far. She turned directly to the crowd, raised both arms, and began conducting the stadium into a wall of pure noise. No anger, no pouting, no extended pleading with officials, just pure, unfiltered, joyful defiance. She was telling 20,000 people to be as loud as they possibly could. She was turning the absurdity of the situation into fuel for the crowd. She was winning, and she was winning with a smile on her face. The final play of the game was almost poetic in the way it crystallized everything this night had represented. A Phoenix defender, with no other options remaining, literally wrapped both arms around Clark's waist in a bear hug to prevent a fast break. A bear hug in a professional basketball game. The referee walked over to Clark after the whistle blew and told her to watch it, as if she had somehow invited being bear-hugged. Clark's reaction, a slow turn to the camera, eyebrows raised, the faintest hint of a smile playing at the corner of her mouth, was the funniest and most perfectly calibrated response imaginable to the absolute absurdity of what she had just been told. She walked off that floor as the undisputed winner in every dimension that matters. The box score said 86-77 Indiana Fever victory that improved their record to 10-17. They will note the 6 technical fouls and the ejection. They will note the signature shoe era beginning for the sport's biggest star. But what the box score will never fully capture is the sheer weight of everything Caitlin Clark has to carry every single time she walks onto a basketball court in this league. She is not just competing against 5 defenders, she is competing against a systemic, league-wide fear response from teams who have decided that physical intimidation and selective officiation are their best tools for slowing down a player whose talent they simply cannot match through basketball skill alone. She is competing against phantom fouls and moving screens and elbows to the ribs and deliberate targeting of injured teammates and veteran players who point fingers in her face and referees who tell her to watch it while another player has their arms wrapped around her waist. And she is winning. She is winning consistently, she is winning convincingly, and she is doing it with a level of competitive joy and authentic confidence that makes watching her feel genuinely electric every single time. Aaliyah Boston gutted it out with a black eye. Kelsey Mitchell gutted it out with a bloody lip. Lexie Hull hit the shots nobody else wanted to take. Monique Billings showed up with a perfect performance when the team needed it most. Maisha Hines-Allen protected her people with every ounce of energy she had, even at the cost of her own night. This Indiana Fever team is not just talented, they are tough. They are unified, and they are on a trajectory that should frighten every team in this league. Wednesday night's rematch against Phoenix is coming. After everything that happened tonight, after the blood and the ejections and the war zone atmosphere, you have to ask yourself one question heading into that game. Have the Mercury learned their lesson about coming into Gainbridge Fieldhouse with violence instead of basketball? Or are they going to double down on everything that got them blown out tonight, except angrier and more desperate? Either way, one thing is absolutely certain. Caitlin Clark will be ready. She always is.